Last month, the federal government let a number of pandemic benefits expire. Support for individuals like the Canada Recovery Benefit, as well as supports for businesses like the Canada Emergency Wage and Rent Subsidies, are gone. In their place, they're targeted benefits for the tourism and hospitality sector and for businesses deemed hardest hit. Both of these benefits will eventually reduce the amount of aid provided starting March 12th. According to a new Nanos poll exclusively for CTV's Power Play, the majority of Canadians also are supporting lowering government pandemic aid. About two-thirds of those polled either want pandemic aid to be lowered or end completely. Only a mere 7% polled wanted pandemic aid increased. So is this the case of Canadian optimism that the pandemic is almost over, or are Canadians tired of footing the bill? Let's find out. And joining me now is Pollster Nic Nanos, the head of Nanos Research. Hi, Nick. Nice to see you, as always. More Canadians are saying that government pandemic aid should be lowered or end completely. Is this a sign that many Canadians view the pandemic is behind us, maybe? Is this a sign of optimism?
I think it's definitely a sign, Joyce, that the stimulus and the support that the government pumped out the door was successful, and that it helped Canadians get through the pandemic. Now Canadians are thinking about a post-pandemic world, Joyce, and in that post-pandemic world, it looks like by a margin of 2-1, the Canadians think either the stimulus spending and the support should either be completely ended or lowered. So we're talking about a tapering. And I don't think it's optimism. I think it's one of those situations where Canadians believe that it's accomplished what it was set out to do, and it's time to transition out.
Okay, but the pandemic, hasn't, been the same across the country, right? Depending on which province you live in, you would have had a drastically different pandemic experience. Are all these regions, which regions are more in favor of lowering pandemic aid, and are there some that are less in favor, some that are more in favor?
Well, what we do see in the CTV Power Play Nanos survey is that if you happen to live in the province of Quebec, you're actually much more likely to think that the stimulus spending and the support should be lowered or end completely at around 75%, so that it's above the national average. Once we get outside of Quebec, it kind of hovers around the average. But, I think the key takeaway here is that for many Canadians, the risk now, at least in the short term, is not necessarily economic. It still remains a potential fourth wave. And that because of the level of vaccinations and the fact that hospitalizations and the stress on the healthcare system has not been as bad, right now Canadians are looking at returning back to work and also returning back to work in person. That's probably on the horizon right now, as a lot of major employers start bringing people back to work. And with that, the urgency for pandemic support is basically on the decline.
So they were really popular programs, and I know, according to your poll, people are starting to think that we could do without them. We see cases climbing. Could there be a backlash if the government ends this aid too quickly?
Well, there could be a backlash if Canadians, for example, started to have trouble paying their bills. And, in another survey that we did for CTV News and was released just a day or two ago, it suggests that there's a significant number of Canadians who are focused on the rising costs of gas and natural gas and fuel and so forth, and that about 3 out of every 10 Canadians expect that it's going to have a negative impact on their ability to pay for necessities. So this is where, on the one hand, when people onto themselves see that the support's not necessarily as urgent, but then there's a bit of a cloud on the horizon where Canadians are worried about the rising price of fuel and potentially inflation. So it could be a little bit of a 1-2 punch, Joyce, that the government will have to grapple with as we enter into the holiday season.
Well, some more things to look forward to, Nic Nanos. As usual, thanks so much for talking to us.
Take it easy.